Ford Consul Classic and Capri Buyer's Guide. In the mid-1950s, Ford had identified the need for a midsize car. Ford had nothing catering to the middle part of the market, which was rapidly being dominated by British domestic models such as the Austin Cambridge and Hillman Minx. A development project to create a midsize Ford started in 1956. This was given added impetus when Vauxhall introduced its Victor midsize model to the British market in 1957. Ford's plan was to repurpose the Consul name, established as the name for the four-cylinder version of its big models, for its new midsize cars, leaving the Zephyr, Zodiac as its big flagship. Development was shared with the 105e Anglia. The new Consul would use the same Kent Model OHV engine, and its platform and running gear would very much be an expansion of the Anglia theme. Styling also came from a similar source, with glitzy cues taken from popular American Fords, especially the Thunderbird and the Galaxy. This included a low-set nose, quad headlamps under eyebrow, front wings, a creased waistline and outturned tail fins. The new Consul range would consist of two models. There was the Consul Classic Saloon with 2 or 4 doors and an Anglia-style reverse rake rear window. And there was the Consul Capri with a sleek pillarless coupe roofline and panoramic windows. Unfortunately, the Anglia's runaway success when it was launched in the autumn of 1959 meant that resources and production capacity intended for the new Consuls was directed elsewhere, and the Consul Classic's launch was postponed until the spring of 1961, with British sales of the Consul Capri not starting until January 1962. By that stage, the gap in the market had been filled by rivals. Fashions had changed as well. By the time the Consul Classic and Capri were on sale in Britain, the Thunderbird and Galaxy models their styling aped were no longer in production, and the contemporary version sported a very different look. The 1.3-litre Consuls were not only down in terms of engine size compared to rivals, but struggled under the weight of all that styled steel, chrome and glass. Performance was mediocre, although the car's ride quality was praised. A 4-speed gearbox with floor-mounted lever and front disc brakes were standard, and the Kent engine was smooth, free-revving and economical. The Consul Classic was one of the first British cars to feature multi-speed windscreen wipers, a cigar lighter and a headlamp flasher function. Ford gave the models more acceptable performance by the end of 1962 with the fitting of a 1.5-litre Kent engine. But the numbers already showed that the Classic and Capri had missed their mark. The instant and formidable commercial success of the sleeker, simpler, smaller Consul Cortina proved that there was no future in the unfortunate Classic and Capri twins. The executive-targeted Consul Corsair replaced the Classic in October 1963, and the Consul Capri was dropped in the summer of 1964, by which time a more powerful model with an engine tuned by Cosworth had been launched. But it wasn't enough to save the prospects of these two cars that managed to be simultaneously outdated and forward-looking. Of course, the Capri name would return later in the 1960s on another coupe, based on Cortina building blocks, this time with phenomenal success. Bodywork. Both versions of the Ford Consul Classic and Capri have a reputation for rust troubles. It's actually no worse than any other mass-produced late 1950s, early 1960s saloons, and these cars were in great demand as second-hand buys because they had relatively thick panels and floor pans. That was ever such a long time ago now, though, and those flamboyant lines can hide all sorts of moisture traps and seams for rust to get a hold. Check the sills, inside and out, the bottoms of the doors, the wheel arches, both sides, the lower rear part of the front wing, the area around the headlamps and the entire length of the waistline, tail fin on the rear wing, especially where it blends into the boot top. On the Capri, Water drains from the side window seal into the sill cavity. The drain holes at the bottom of the sill inevitably become blocked and rust sets in. Check around the windscreen and A-pillars for bubbling paint, as any rust here almost certainly means it's got into the bulkhead and a full strip down and restoration is on the cards. See if the doors sag on the hinges or scrape the sills. If they do, it may well mean the bulkhead has gone soft. Inspect the floors and footwells and the boot floor for rust. Under the bonnet, check the suspension strut mounts, inner wings and areas around the engine mountings. The big problem is that all the panels are unique to the Classic and Capri, and they were not made for very long or in big numbers, so repairs either require sourcing hard-to-find original panels or fabricating ones from scratch, and either course is expensive. The Ford Classic and Capri Owners Club, membership of which really is a must if you own, or are thinking about owning, one of these, can provide repair panels for the major trouble spots and holds a stock of full panels, but these go for £1,000 to £2,000 each, and you'll almost certainly need multiple panels to repair a rusty console. Some panels are available in new reproduction, and panels for the floors and sills are more reasonably priced. You may well come across cars that have been bodged with filler or poor quality welded repairs, or fitted with glass fiber wings at a time when steel panels were even more scarce. Putting right such a car will probably not be cost effective. There is a lot of chrome on these cars and restoration costs can quickly add up. Badges and bits of Brightwork are being remanufactured now, but it all comes at a price. Engine and transmission. If the bodywork is in decent condition, you're pretty much home and dry, since mechanically the Classic and Capri generally use readily available Ford parts and it's all durable and long-lived. The underpowered and fragile early 1.3-litre Kent engine is an exception. Most were swiftly replaced by the 1.5-litre or at least a later 1.3-litre 5-bearing engine from a Cortina. Other than that, just check for signs of old age on the Kent engine. Blue smoke, especially under load, showing worn bores, heavy breathing from the oil filler cap at idle, rumbles from worn bottom end bearing and a rattling timing chain or clattery valve gear. Elderly Kents do also suffer from rusted out core plugs, leading to coolant leaks. If the temperature gauge rises when worked hard or idling for a long period, the radiator or cooling passages are probably clogged up. There's no oil pressure gauge, but be sure that the warning light doesn't flicker at idle when the engine's warm. If a gauge has been fitted, you want to see at least 40 psi when on the move and ideally 10 psi with a hot engine at idle. None of these issues are terminal. Kent engine parts are readily available, although some standard items such as non-oversized piston sets and parts for the reverse flow cylinder head is found on these cars can be surprisingly tricky to track down these days, and rebuilt engines cost around £1,500. The 1.3-litre models have what is essentially a 105E Anglia gearbox, while the 1.5-litre ones introduced the 3-rail, all-synchro, bullet unit later used widely in the Cortina, Corsair and Performance Escorts. Both boxes can be rebuilt with little trouble or cost, £500 or so, if they're worn. Check that the synchromesh, where used, works smoothly, that the box doesn't jump out of engagement if the throttle is suddenly closed, and that there are no rumbles or screams from worn bearings. Watch for knocking sounds from chipped teeth on first gear in the early cars. Suspension, steering and brakes. The basic mechanical layout. Front McPherson struts with coil springs and lower track control arms, a live rear axle on semi-elliptical leaf springs, a worm gear steering box with drag links, show the console's parentage as a scaled-up 105E Anglia and would be familiar on many other Fords of the 1960s. It is simple, straightforward and robust so long as structural corrosion hasn't affected the mounting points. But while it may look familiar, a lot of the specific parts are model-specific. If the struts themselves are worn, then you'll have to find a new old stock or good second-hand replacement, which is difficult and costly. Individual bushes and bearings are available new, so if the strut is good enough for an overhaul, then that's not the end of the world. Listen and feel for knocking from the top bush and wandering, baggy handling on the road. Rear leaf springs are available new for about £550 per pair, so if the originals are rusted solid or have lost their shape, that's an easy fix. The steering box itself is long-lived, and woolly steering or a car that drifts along its course is likely to be caused by a worn idler joint on the drag link. New joints, bushes and coupling for the steering system are still available, but steering boxes are not. Existing ones can be rebuilt, and a conversion kit does exist to convert consoles to a steering rack using later Escort parts. The steering box itself is long-lived, and woolly steering or a car that drifts along its course is likely to be caused by a worn idler joint on the drag link. New joints, bushes and coupling for the steering system are still available, but steering boxes are not. Existing ones can be rebuilt, and a conversion kit does exist to convert consoles to a steering rack using later Escort parts. Front disc brakes as standard was one of the console twin's selling points. Ironically, the front discs themselves are no longer available, mostly because the existing stock was long ago snapped up to upgrade Anglias. New calipers can be bought if there are leaks or wear, and all the parts for the rear drums and the rest of the hydraulic system are still available. Be sure that the discs are not corroded, pitted, warped or worn, and that the rest of the system is continent. Interior, trim and electrics. The soft furnishings of the Ford Consul Classic and Capri are largely unique to each model. So if the interior is tatty, then retrimming by an upholsterer is the way forward. Expensive, but worth it, and a good way to obtain a car at a reasonable price if the structure is good but the interior isn't. Two-tone vinyl seats were standard, with cloth and leather being very rare optional extras. The Consul Capri GT came with an all-black interior, a leather cloth dashtop and extra instruments. All these features need to be present and correct on a decent example today. The horn rings are fragile in old age, break easily and replacements are scarce, so you want to see one in good condition on any prospective purchase. Most of the dials and switches also appeared on the Anglia and Mk3 Zephyr, so are not too difficult to put right. The electrics are simple and consists entirely of industry-standard Lucas, AC Delco and Butler parts that are easy to find either in original or reproduced form. Just be sure that the car's wiring loom hasn't become brittle with age. A full rewiring will be expensive since ready-made looms don't exist, and that the connectors and earth points are in good condition. There's not much electrical gear on these cars, but what is there should work properly. Ford Consul Classic and Capri, my verdict. Classic by name, and classic by nature. These are one of these cars that was almost born to be an enthusiast's pride and joy. The passé styling, mediocre performance and relatively high cost that blighted the models when new doesn't matter now. These Fords will turn heads wherever they go. They drip with late 1950s American character but at a usably British scale and use widespread and familiar mechanical parts. Get one in good structural and cosmetic condition and you'll have a superb classic that's a real slice of Ford history. Inevitably, the Consul Capri is significantly more valuable than the Classic. Prices for decent coupes start at £10,000 for one that's solid and presentable but will probably have a non-original interior and perhaps some later mechanical parts. One with the original interior in good condition and high-quality paintwork with all matching colors and trim will be £20,000, and a fully restored Capri in Concours condition will go for £25,000 to £30,000. Viable projects will be worth £3,000, £5,000. The Consul Classic is much more affordable, with £12,000 being the price for the very best examples in restored or highly original condition. And solid but average one, perhaps with some non-original trim or an older respray in a non-original color, will be £5,000 £7,000, and a project case will be £1,000 or so. Ford Cortina Mk1 and Mk2 Buyer's Guide. Ford Cortina Mk1 and Mk2 have long been seen as stylish, usable classics, and with values tailing off. Now's your chance to own one. Ford introduced the conventionally engineered Cortina in September 1962 as a medium-sized machine that could compete on costs with BMC's Mini. To save cash, it stuck with a traditional rear-wheel drive 3-box layout, adding tail fins and piece symbol-like backlights to form an effortlessly stylish design. At first named the Consul Cortina and available with just one engine, 1198cc, the range of 2- and 4-door saloons grew to include a 1498cc version, plus the sporty GT with Cosworth-tuned 78 bhp powerplant, and the glorious Lotus Cortina, raised to legendary status by the likes of Jim Clark, naturally not included within this buying guide. Keen pricing helped the Cortina to top the sales charts, with 1,013,391 assembled worldwide in just 4 years. But Ford couldn't afford to be complacent. A new fascia came in 1963, followed by Aeroflow ventilation in autumn 1964. A second-generation Cortina arrived in October 1966, with a smart, albeit anonymous, reskin, wider track and 1,298cc powerplant alongside the previous 1.5-litre models. From September 1967, both were replaced by Ford's new 1.3 or 1.6-litre Crossflow, giving rise to the dramatic Cortina 1600E Executive Express. Meanwhile, the Lotus had been continued into Mk2 form as a less specialized package. After a midlife revamp in 1968, the Mk2 Cortina continued to sell relentlessly, with 1,024,869 built by the time it was replaced by the Mk3 in October 1970. The first two generations of Cortina remain much loved and increasingly affordable classics. Here's what to look for. Bodywork rot is the Cortina's eternal enemy, and serious structural corrosion, along with the price of panels, can make a base model Mk1 or Mk2 uneconomical to repair. Rust can be anywhere, but it's most important to check the inner wings and strut tops, bulkhead, scuffle panel, A-pillars, sills, jacking points, floor pan, rear chassis rails, spring hangers, spare wheel well and boot floor, all of which can be tricky to repair. If you're inspecting a Mk1 GT or a 1600E, ensure the factory welded radius rod brackets are present under the rear floor. A 1600E should also feature Lotus-type strengthening plates and metal dashboard panel. Examine the front valance, bonnet, wings, doors, rear wheel arches and boot lid, tailgate, bearing in mind replacement panels, whether second-hand or reproduction, can cost 4-figure sums. Indeed, base model and left-hand drive Cortinas are still being chopped up by specialists to provide cuts for the restoration of other cars. Brightwork, grills, bumpers and aluminium trim can be tricky or impossible to source, although some pieces have been remade in stainless. Most of the lighting is available as new or reproduction, but 1600E driving lamps are rare, and beware of Mk1 front indicators that suffer due to their alloy housings. Earthing problems are frequent throughout, so pay attention to the condition of the wiring. Only post-1968 Cortinas were equipped with a fuse box, meaning it's vital to ensure the loom is fit for use. Engine and transmission. Mk1 Cortinas and early Mk2s were fitted with the pre-Crossflow Kent in 1198cc, 1298cc or 1498cc form, a harsh engine with a tendency to expire quickly. Unless very low mileage, expect it to have been rebuilt or replaced at least once before. Mk2s from September 1967 featured the Kent Crossflow in 1298cc or 1599cc guise, an improvement but still unlikely to exceed 60,000 to 70,000 miles without a rebuild. The smaller pre-Crossflow unit is especially prone to worn crankshaft bearings, but all power plants are susceptible. Listen for rumbling from the bottom end. Knocking could come from piston slap, so look for blue smoke from the exhaust, which is typical of tired pistons, rings, cylinder bores. Beware of breathing from the oil filler cap or dipstick, usually pointing to excessive wear but potentially simply a blocked breather. Similarly, a whiff of smoke at startup suggests valve stem oil seals, which are inexpensive to replace. Expect to hear rattling from the timing chain. It's generally nothing to worry about unless particularly severe, in which case it could slice through the alloy cover and empty the sump. A loud clacking could suggest a scored camshaft or broken follower, requiring engine removal. Otherwise, refreshing the oil and adjusting the valve clearances should help a healthy engine. Oil leaks, notably from the rocker cover, are common, and it's wise to look for coolant loss from rusted core plugs. Poor running often points to a basic problem with the carburetor or ignition system, but bear in mind a Crossflow will plod on indefinitely in a sorry state of disrepair. Although it was once cheap to recondition a Cortina engine or throw in a second-hand scrapyard find motor, that's no longer the case. You're now looking at a four-figure sum to perform a DIY rebuild. Although a 3-speed automatic gearbox was optional, most Mk1 and Mk2 Cortinas had a 4-speed manual gearbox. In early cars a 3-rail version, or in later Mk2s a single-rail Type 3 with a slicker shift. Listen for rumbling, pointing to worn bearings, and check for crunching when changing gear, meaning the synchromesh is tired. A worn 3-rail gearbox will jump out of gear on the overrun, so watch out for the owner holding the lever in position when driving. The cause could be a simple problem with the selector fork, or a more serious issue with the synchro hubs or bulk rings, requiring a rebuild. A Type 3 is more likely to be leaking oil from the back seal or have its gear lever rattling and coming loose, common and easy to fix. Whining from the transmission is quite normal, but beware of growling from the differential, tired bearings, and look out for leaks from the rear axle. Prop shaft vibrations typically result from worn universal joints, which can eventually damage the gearbox. Suspension, steering and brakes. Vague steering is common, typically due to a tired steering box that may need adjustment. Ford recommended every 12,000 miles, but is probably down to worn nylon idler bushes. Play in the steering may also result from perished rubber steering links, wear in the steering arms or corrosion around the mountings. Knocking from the front points to worn strut top mounts. On later Mk2s the bonded mounts are obsolete and very expensive, so most replace with aftermarket roller tops. While poor handling may mean the coil springs are broken or the shock absorbers are tired, check for the car sitting unevenly. The rear leaf springs tend to sag and rust, and the dampers leak. Replacements are readily available. Although some early Mk1s were equipped with drum brakes all round, most surviving Cortinas have discs up front. Most issues are simple: rusty discs, seized calipers, sticking, leaking wheel cylinders and broken handbrake cables. The rear drums need regular adjustment, and the self-adjusting cogs are prone to failure. The umbrella handbrake mechanism of many models can also be troublesome. The biggest problem you'll face is finding drums for larger engine Cortinas, which are almost impossible to source. Even the shoes are tricky to find, and often poor quality. Interior and electrics. Poor survival rates, and multiple color choices, mean lesser model Cortinas are trickier to restore than plush equivalents due to poor availability of trim. It's thus essential to ensure the car you're buying has an excellent interior. Seats collapse, vinyl upholstery may be torn, and door cards could be damaged. Carpets tend to be threadbare, and headlinings droop. Thankfully, most of the vinyl can be repaired, and many items, such as mats, parcel shelves, door rubbers and seat covers, have been reproduced, albeit at a cost. Beware of a cracked dashboard top or damaged steering wheel. On sporting models, broken, missing trim, such as center consoles and gauges, can be pricey due to being suitable for a Lotus Cortina. The wooden cappings found in 1600s tend to be tarnished or cracked, but specialist restoration is the solution. Mk1 indicator stalks are tricky to source, so expect to pay the price. Ford Cortina Mk1 and Mk2, our verdict. The Cortina was the model that kept Britain's family car buyers and sales reps on the road in vast numbers, with even the most basic versions offering a pleasing, albeit not dynamic, driving style, no-nonsense engineering and excellent value for money. The Mk1 and Mk2 models no longer provide that advantage of affordability, however, thanks to soaring demand, and ever-increasing asking prices, of classic Fords. Fans of the Cortina will argue that it's worth it, of course, with the car's easy ownership experience and simple maintenance adding to its overall appeal. Whichever generation from the first two appeals to you the most, you'll struggle to find a contemporary saloon, or estate, that makes much more sense, although you could arguably find one that now offers better value for money. Surprisingly for a classic Ford, Cortina Mk1 and Mk2 prices have taken a hit over the last 12 months. Sporting models have seen the highest drops, with 10% knocked off, a lot when you're talking about a tidy £60,000 Mk1 Lotus. Lesser models start at £1,500 for a basket case, £4,000 upwards for something worth restoring, and £10,000 in excellent condition. A similar Mk1 GT or 1600E is upwards of £20,000. Two-door Cortinas cost typically 25% more than a four-door, although a left-hand drive import is around half the price of its UK equivalent, which makes conversion quite tempting. Bear in mind restoration costs of a 1.3 Super are the same as a 1.600E, so factor it into any asking price. Factory original and concours cars are still in strong demand, so prices can sometimes double, depending on desirability. Ford Escort Mark I and Mark II Buyer's Guide. Prices may have gone through the roof in recent years, but the Ford Escort Mark I or Mark II is still a great classic choice. Here's what to look for by the mid-1960s, a pan-European program involving Ford's still independent research centres in the UK and Germany to replace the 105E Anglia was starting to gather pace. Although Ford's then Birmingham-based research centre had explored a front-wheel drive setup, along with a rear engine, a decision was made to produce the new car around the outgoing model's rear-wheel drive format and opt for a McPherson strut front suspension layout instead of anything too radical. The decision not to adopt a more adventurous drivetrain had obviously disappointed the Cologne-based team following the introduction of their innovative front-wheel drive Taunus. However, Ford's German development team was busy working on several other projects, so the bulk of the work developing the Anglia's replacement fell on Ford's UK-based design studios. Lead designer for Project New Anglia was the noted stylist Harris Mann, and the team's target was to produce a small car to beat Vauxhall's Viva. By the time Ford of Europe was formed in June 1967, development of the new Escort was well underway, and the German team only became seriously involved with a few late changes and the addition of the four-door version to the range. Ford of Europe unveiled the Escort to the public gaze in January 1968 at the Brussels Motor Show, and the all-new model became an instant success. Advertised as the small car that isn't, the OHV Kent-powered 1100 Super had a price tag of £666, while the twin-choke Weber-fueled 1300 GT showcased the Escort's sporting pretensions. A three-door Estate arrived 3 months later, and a practical four-door variant of the popular Escort was introduced to the range the following year. The 1558cc Lotus-powered twin-cam was first of the hairy-chested Escorts, featuring a reinforced two-door body shell, and this rare model is now both extremely desirable and equally expensive. Another Escort featuring flared arches to emulate those of the twin-cam was the much cheaper 1298cc Crossflow-powered Sport, and in 1970 the 16-valve, 120 bhp Cosworth BDA, belt drive, A-Series, powered RS 1600 RS, standing for Rally Sport, broke cover. To commemorate that year's London-Mexico Rally, Ford unleashed the 1599cc Crossflow-powered Escort Mexico, a model that over the years has been extensively cloned. Hot Escorts continued to clock up regular rally and race wins throughout the early 1970s. The now highly desirable, and expensive, 2-liter Pinto-powered Escort RS 2000 was created by Ford's Advanced Vehicle Operations, AVO, and released for limited public consumption in July 1973. Ford produced the Mark I version of the Escort, including the upmarket 1300E, until the heavily revised Mark II took over the reins in late 1974. Developed under the codename Brenda, the second incarnation of what was fast becoming the nation's favorite car now featured a totally different profile. Out went the early car's supple curves, and in came a sharp, squared-off body shape sitting on a revised underbody that had been used for the last 6 months of Mark I production. A full-sized black-painted front grille now replaced the earlier car's dog-bone affair, and entry-level Mark IIs were badged as the starkly equipped Popular. There was still no hatchback in the range, although a four-door Estate was available. Mainstream models now included L and GL badged variants, while the gear badge took over from the E suffix on the range-topping non-sporting models. Although the mechanical lineup was very much as before, the good news was that there was now a 1599cc 1.6-liter unit available for mainstream models. As with the Mark I, Ford produced an impressive range of sporting Mark II Escorts, and these included the Sport, RS 1800, RS Mexico and RS 2000. The 1.3 and 1.6-liter Sport models had replaced the Mark I GT, and the DOHC RS 1800 was another Escort homologation special, produced to allow the Mark II to go racing. As with the Mark I, Ford produced an impressive range of sporting Mark II Escorts, and these included the Sport, RS 1800, RS Mexico and RS 2000. The 1.3 and 1.6-liter Sport models had replaced the Mark I GT, and the DOHC RS 1800 was another Escort homologation special, produced to allow the Mark II to go racing. The 1593cc SOHC Pinto-powered Mark II Mexico was the ultimate boy racer, although it was successful overshadowed by the very capable Escort RS 2000. Powered by a 1993cc version of the Pinto engine, the RS 2000 was rated as a great driver's car and was instantly recognized by its plastic wedge-shaped nose cone and quad headlight setup. From late 1978, a cheaper variant of the RS 2000 equipped with steel wheels took over from where the Mexico left off, and Mark II production finally came to an end with the introduction of the heavily revised Mark III hatchback range in 1980. Following is what to look for when viewing either a Mark I or Mark II Escort, whether it's a very expensive sporting model or a more affordable cooking version. Bodywork. The Mark I's bodywork was quite an advanced structure for the time. Each complete side of the two-door model was stamped out as a single panel, which means that door gaps were very tight and even all the way around the opening. A poor-fitting door is a good giveaway for any poor-quality accident repairs. Not many Escorts, Mark I or Mark II, will have escaped an occasional touch from the welding torch, as rust will no doubt have attacked some areas on even the best-maintained examples. Corrosion hotspots are the front inner wings, suspension top mountings, front and rear of the outer wings, bonnet mountings, floor pans, door bottoms, sills, boot floor, both valances and all the wheel arches. Rust will also seriously weaken the suspension mountings if left unattended, and the base of the windscreen can also corrode badly. Water leaks are not uncommon, so lift all the carpets and check the condition of the floors and bulkheads for any signs of damp. Tracing any missing exterior trim will be difficult on both marks, and restoring seriously pitted chrome-plated Mazak trim is virtually impossible. Engine and transmission. The Mark I Escort was powered by a decent range of engines, with mainstream models receiving either a 1098cc or 1298cc Kent OHV inline-4. These are easy units to work on, and parts supply is reasonably good through club contacts and mark specialists. The Mark II received a power boost with the inclusion of a much-needed 1.6-litre power unit, and all these engines are reasonably long-lasting providing they've been serviced correctly. When it comes to the Pinto engine fitted to some of the sporting models, these are equally straightforward to inspect and work on, but any hammering from the top of the engine will indicate a worn camshaft. A common problem with these engines was a blockage in the oil feed tube along the cam rail, and if the oil hadn't been changed regularly, or the incorrect grade was used, the camshaft suffered. The Pinto engine has a cam belt, so inquire if it's been replaced recently and budget for the cost of the work if this reasonably straightforward DIY job hasn't been done recently. Twin-cam engines are far more complex to overhaul, and any work on these units should really be left to an expert. Kent engines, on the other hand, can also suffer from noisy tappets, but this is generally down to worn cam followers. When inspecting the power unit, pay particular attention to the condition of the coolant in the header tank. Any oily scum floating on the surface could indicate a failed head gasket is just around the corner. Blue smoke exiting the exhaust will indicate worn bores and/or piston rings, although oil could be being drawn down the valve stems on high-mileage motors. A worn-out Autolite carb on some of the non-sporting models will cause the engine to run rough. A Weber conversion kit is a worthwhile conversion if that's the case, and don't worry too much about the odd oil leak. The Crossflow and Pinto engines can leak from the rocker cover, and it's not uncommon for oil to drip from the front and rear crank seals as well. Several different types of 4-speed manual gearbox were fitted to the Escort, with sporting versions receiving a close ratio box. Any ominous rumblings when in the first 3 ratios will indicate worn or tired bearings, although these can go on grumbling away for years before any action is required. Jumping out of gear, especially on the overrun, is a sign that the box is well overdue an overhaul. Don't forget to test the clutch on manual cars and locate where the biting point is. Fitting a new clutch assembly isn't the end of the world, as the gearbox can be taken out from underneath the car. As the Kent engine doesn't produce a huge amount of torque, an autobox can go for years, but always check the condition of the fluid. It should be bright red and changes should be smooth, with no jerking on takeoff or while swapping ratios. Suspension, steering and brakes. The steering rack fitted to both the Mark I and Mark II rarely gives any trouble, but check the condition of the rubber gaiters. Any splits will let in road grit, which will lead to rapid wear. Any clonks from the front suspension may be down to a worn anti-roll bar or a broken front coil spring. Front McPherson struts can leak and are easily replaced, but make sure you know how to compress the road spring safely. Rear leaf springs can soldier on for decades, but the dampers may require changing if the rear end feels soggy. Rear wheel bearings can get noisy as the mileage mounts up, but these are pressed on and replacement is definitely a workshop job. When it comes to the braking system, a lot of Escorts were fitted with drums all round. Quite a few of the better equipped variants, along with all the sporting models, featured front discs. The only issues to check for in this department are the condition of the discs and/or drums, and look out for any leaking wheel cylinders or corroded brake lines. While checking out the braking system, make sure the handbrake holds the car on an incline and the ratchet holds the lever securely. Interior and trim. Vinyl trim was not only a standard fit on the poorly equipped base models, but was also found on the Sport, XL, Super and Mexico, while GL, RS and E-badged models were fitted with cloth seat facings. Both materials are reasonably hard-wearing, and quite a few patterns and styles are still available from specialist suppliers. Employing the services of a professional trimmer will easily revive the look of a tired interior on one of these cars. Sourcing replacement hard trim can be difficult, but quite a few repro parts are available, and clubs can be a great source for tracking down second-hand trim. One really tricky part to find is the Mexico sculptured rear seat, and this is a good indicator of whether the car is the genuine item or just a tarted-up two-door base model. Although the Escort's electrical system is a very simple setup, poor earths and corroded contacts will take time to locate and fix. Bodged or untidy extra wiring, especially around the fusebox area, can be nightmare to sort, but if the loom is in a really poor state, specialist suppliers can supply a model-specific replacement. There's not too much equipment inside the Escort's cabin to check, but it should all ideally work, and don't forget that the horn is located on the end of the indicator stalk. Ford Escort Mark I and Mark II, verdict. Buying a sporting Escort can be a minefield for the uninitiated. Dressed-up imposters sold as the real thing isn't uncommon, so a pre-purchase check by someone from the relevant club is really necessary to avoid being conned. On the other hand, it's fine if the car is being advertised as a replica, and this can be a bargain way of getting into hot Avo Escort ownership. However, a lot of two-door Escorts have been stolen to produce a Mexico or RS model, so double-check all the paperwork is in order and walk away from the deal if in any doubt. Two-door L or XL badged Escorts are still thankfully reasonably affordable. If you want to enjoy a good driving slice of 60s or 70s saloon car motoring and like the idea of your classic holding its value or even appreciating over time, the Escort remains a great choice. Ford Escort Mark III and Mark IV Buyer's Guide. The Escort Mark III and Mark IV dispensed with the layout that had served their trusty rear-wheel drive predecessors so well, but went on to be huge successes. Here's what you need to know when buying one today. with the Mk2 Escort facing stiff competition from a new wave of hatchbacks, including its Fiesta stablemate that was actually more spacious inside. Ford gave its bestseller a radical makeover with the launch of the Mark III version in September 1980. Codenamed Erika, the Mark III was now driven by the front wheels, and the new body embraced the hatchback design, although there was the addition of a bustle that extended the tailgate with a hint of a conventional boot lid. Also brand new was independent rear suspension and the addition of Ford's new CVH engine, compound valve hemispherical, in 1.3 and 1.6-litre sizes, with the entry-level engine the Fiesta's 1.1-litre Kent-based Valencia motor. What was more familiar to Escort buyers was the choice of cooking trim levels: base, popular, L, GL and gear, the majority of which were available in 3, 5-door and 3-door estate body styles, with a 5-door estate joining the range in 1983, plus a cabriolet too. On top these, sporting variants included the new XR3 and subsequent XR3i, which came 8 months after the limited-run RS 1600i and was later sold alongside the boosted RS Turbo. Engineered to keep maintenance requirements to a minimum, the Mark III was incredibly successful and soon became Britain's bestseller. So it was little surprise Ford took a very restrained approach when it came to giving it a mid-term facelift. Announced in January 1986, it was codenamed Erika 86 and would commonly become known as the Mark IV. Changes amounted to a sleeker, softer-styled front end, wraparound bumpers, reprofiled tailgate, smoother rear lights, the addition of a Granada-style dash and some worthwhile changes to the previously criticized suspension. The changes worked to make the new Escort significantly more refined, and the range-topping XR3i and RS Turbo were noticeably easier to live with and more relaxed than their Mark III counterparts. However, it was the cooking models that would make up the vast majority of sales. There was a good selection of models to choose from too, the lineup spanning popular, popular plus, L, GL and gear models. Engine-wise, it was much the same as the Mark III, including the 1.6-litre CVH, 1.6-litre diesel and 1.1-litre OHV units, but there was now also the choice of a new 1.3-litre OHV motor and a 1.4-litre lean burn C versus H. Ford's decision to tread carefully with the facelift certainly paid off, and right up until it was replaced by the completely redesigned Mk5 in September 1990, the Mark IV continued to be a mainstay in the UK's top 10 best-selling cars. However, the long-term lack of an enthusiast following for the normal models means that it's easier to purchase a good RS Turbo or XR3i rather than, for example, a popular. Here's what you need to know. Bodywork: both the Mark III and Mark IV are notorious for a rotten battery tray and surrounding bulkhead, but serious rust is also likely in the rear inner arches, rear chassis rails, floor pan, including the boot, behind the headlights and the front crossmember. More visible rust spots include the door bottoms, wings, the leading edge of the bonnet, roof gutters and tailgate, including around the hinges. Be particularly wary of bubbling paint around the sunroof. It's a sure sign that there's significant rust underneath as a result of the drainage channels being blocked, and be wary of body-kitted cars hiding corrosion. Some panels and repair sections are available from Magnum Panels and are inexpensive, but genuine Ford parts are getting expensive. Reckon on circa £250 for a wing as opposed to just under £100 for a new pattern item. Replacement side moldings, bumper overriders and end caps for the Mark III are all hard to source. Engine and transmission: the CVH engines aren't particularly refined, but if the top end is rattling, then it's likely that old oil has sludged up the hydraulic lifters and trashed the camshaft. A tired CVH will breathe heavy, although the often perished rocker cover gasket can also leave oil over the engine bay. Blue smoke is another sign of a terminally ill motor, although if it's on the overrun it can be the commonly worn valve stem seals. Cam belts should ideally be replaced every 20,000 miles, rather than the 36,000-mile interval that Ford originally stipulated, and while a good service usually sorts most running issues, the distributor can also be at fault as it's prone to advancing too early. The RS1600i's unique twin-coil ignition system can fail and be especially difficult to replace, so be extra vigilant on any reluctance to start, misfiring, or inconsistent running. The Valencia 1.1-liter motor can cover a decent mileage if well maintained, but an excessively worn engine will have a noisy timing chain and breathe heavy. If the engine is tired, it won't like ticking over, and while it's never been the quietest unit, if it's making an intermittent clacking sound, it's a sign of the camshaft followers having split and cracked. The variable Venturi carburetor on early models is infamous for various problems, from an erratic automatic choke to collapsed diaphragms, but many will have been converted in years since. Fuel-injected cars can also present rich or lean running behavior, often a sign of a seized metering unit, something that can be tricky to fix. The Bosch K-Jetronic mechanical fuel injection system fitted to the XR3i is more reliable than the later i90 spec electronic injection system, but some parts can now be difficult to source. The BC 5-speed gearbox is slightly slicker than the 4-speed, but both feel notchy. If finding gears is an issue, then something's amiss, usually with the linkage or, if there's also jumping out of gear, the selector. Wear and the plastic ratchet that self-adjusts the clutch can also cause gear selection problems, the telltale of advanced wear being a clicking noise when the clutch is engaged. Both gearboxes can handle high mileages, but signs of obvious wear are any rumbling or whining, while worn synchromesh tends to be most likely on second and third gears. A noisy fifth often means the gear has come adrift on the input shaft and worn the splines. The RS1600i had a unique gearbox with a different fifth gear ratio and a limited slip differential arrangement. This is a rarity, and many have been converted to XR3 units in the past, so be sure to check it. Suspension, steering and brakes. The Mark IV got tweaked suspension to further address the long-standing issues with the Escort's damping and handling characteristics, but even so both the Mark III and Mark IV don't have the smoothest ride. If it appears to be overly harsh, then the dampers and springs are past their best, a simple bounce test being a good indicator of condition. Track control arm bushes are commonly perished, telltales being vague steering and a clunking over bumps, and the usual and easiest fix is to replace the entire arm. It's also essential to look for cracks around the mounting points of the TCAs. Steering-wise, the rack isn't the greatest, so listen and feel for irregularities when turning the wheel. However, a clicking sound on full lock will be more to do with tired CV joints. Cars that have been stood present the most problems, the inactivity giving rise to seized wheel cylinders, sticking calipers and rusty front discs. All are easy to replace and cheap to boot, however. Brake pipes need close inspection too. After 40-odd years they've either already been replaced or are ripe for it. On Mark IVs, the optional and harsh in-operation ABS can be costly to fix, but otherwise it's the same fare of looking out for warped or corroded front discs and seized components. Interior and trim Mark III dashboards commonly crack above the instrument panel and around the heater vents. Look for the plastic warping around the central heater vents, while the glovebox lid of better specification cars also tends to bow. The gear's door bins can crack around the mountings where they screw into the door cards. On Mark IVs, the dashes don't tend to crack but get misshapen on the plusher models, while the vinyl on the main door cards tends to lift. Myriad trim colors and the fact that many lower-spec Escorts haven't been considered to be worth saving in the past means that replacing tired interior parts is difficult, something to remember if you're a big fan of originality. Replacement trim can only be sourced second-hand, and while it's cheap when it does surface, it's a lot harder to find than that for RS and XR models. A good uncut parcel shelf can command a premium, however. Window rubbers can shrink and perish with age, but don't ignore a damp front carpet, particularly on the passenger side, as it's a possible sign of serious corrosion in the battery tray and bulkhead. In terms of electrics, rear lights can play up and faulty steering wheel stalks can cause lighting problems, but most electrical issues are simply down to age and are commonly cured with a clean of earths and connections. In particular, on plusher cars where there are faults with both the central locking and electric windows, the usual cause is the shared earth. Replacement lights are easily sourced, and it's relatively straightforward to source a factory stereo if it's been changed. Ford Escort Mark III and Mark IV. Our verdict with its predecessor valued so highly for so long, the Mark III and Mark IV's time as affordable classics is surely limited. And by that, we mean the non-sporting models, as the ship has already sailed on the hot variants. For a relatively modest outlay, you'll get a practical classic with strong parts availability, but also a great conversation starter as folk remember the days when cooking Ford Escorts were everywhere. The Mark III and Mark IV might not have the kudos of their rally hero forebears, but that means you get more for your money. The high-performance Mark III models are already highly desirable, especially the rather serious RS1600i, and the days of a cheap XR3 are largely over. The £722,500 made by the unique black RS Turbo driven by Diana, Princess of Wales, was a one-off, but a top-condition stock RS Turbo can still command as much as £40,000. Today, an early carburetted XR3 can go for as much as £20,000, with an XR3i not far behind it. Mark IV XR3i and RS Turbo models aren't quite as prized as Mark III cars yet, but you can expect to £8,000 to £10,000 for an excellent example of the former and the best part of £20,000 for the latter in comparable condition. Thankfully, non-sporting variants are far cheaper, though prices have risen. You'll need at least £2,500 for a usable Mark III, up to £4,000 for a tidy car, and above £6,000 for the best. It's still possible to buy a usable Mark IV for under £2,000, with the nicer cars typically selling for £2,500 to £3,000 at auction and the best cars heading towards £5,000. Ford Granada Mk1. Buyer's Guide. Once a mainstay of the executive saloon market, the original Ford Granada offers space, comfort and a great driving experience. Ford was under no illusions when it came to replacing the Zephyr and Zodiac models. The firm was well aware that something more modern was needed. Work had begun in the late 1960s, and the result was a car that celebrated its 50th birthday last year, the Granada and Consul of 1972. Built at both Dagenham and the Cologne plant, the big saloon and the estate available later the same year proved the perfect range toppers for Ford and were cars that many aspired to. Having a Granada on the driveway showed you'd done well for yourself, and if you couldn't quite stretch to a BMW or Mercedes, then this was the next best thing. Especially if it wore the gear badge. This was the first European Ford to do so, and no doubt many an owner felt a twinge of superiority when they surveyed all the extra luxury kit. Such badge snobbery aside, the Granada had plenty to recommend it, from the spacious and comfortable interior to a driving experience that was much improved compared to its predecessors. Ford were on to a winner. and with numerous tweaks and updates it would last until 1977 when the Mk2 was waiting in the wings. Bodywork. There's no escaping the fact that rust is the major concern when considering a Mk1, and with plenty of metalwork to check, it's a case of casting a critical eye over every inch of it. Starting at the front, you'll need to pay close attention to the state of the bonnet and wings, both inner and outer, with a particular focus on the headlamp bowls and the lower sections, and bear in mind that finding original replacements for these panels is tricky. You can source reproduction front wings, either in steel or glass fiber, from European suppliers, but they are quite pricey. The front valance can rot out, too. Working rearwards, the bottoms of the doors are another common rust spot, and pay plenty of attention to the sills, with the back ends being prone to turning frilly. Rear wheel arches, quarter panels and valance need careful scrutiny as well. And that's not the end of it, as corrosion can strike beneath a vinyl roof, while blocked sunroof drains can lead to rot in the C-pillars. Satisfied with the condition up top? Then get a good look beneath, focusing on the cabin and boot floors and the front chassis legs. And remember to assess the state of the paintwork and make sure that a shiny exterior isn't hiding filler and grot beneath. Finally, you'll need to consider the condition of exterior trim and chrome. Tracking down replacement bits can prove difficult. Light units are scarce, so anything that is damaged or missing has the potential to make restoration more of a headache. That said, the likes of Motomobil in Germany is a good starting point for sourcing spares. If all this sounds like bad news, it's no worse than many other classics of this period. And while a major restoration project needs to be approached with a degree of caution, there's plenty of knowledge and advice to be found within the various Granada owners' clubs. Engine and transmission. While you'll find cars for sale powered by the smaller engines, it's the lusty 3.0-litre V6 that tends to be most common, and it's a unit that suits the Granada's relaxing driving experience. It's also an engine that, with proper care, will prove capable of covering big mileages, so evidence that the oil and filter have been changed every 3,000 miles will be reassuring. Don't ignore the usual checks for exhaust smoke, overheating, low oil pressure and signs of head gasket failure, but assuming it's not been neglected, there's not much to worry about, and parts supply is very good. Those same checks apply to any of the engines you might come across. And while camshaft wear can affect the 2.0-litre Pinto, it's a very easy engine to work on or rebuild on a DIY basis. The mechanical simplicity continues with the transmissions, where you'll find either a 4-speed manual or the C3 3-speed automatic. The former is usefully robust, and a test drive will soon reveal any whines or noises that point to the need for a rebuild. Don't forget to check the operation of the clutch, although replacement isn't difficult and you can source a replacement for less than £100. As for the automatic, it's both strong and reliable, so really just needs a check of the fluid to make sure it's not sludgy or blackened. Shift should be free of jerks or delay, but should an overhaul be needed, there are plenty of specialists that can handle this. Finally, use the test drive to check for any noises from the back axle or clunks caused by worn prop shaft joints, although neither are a major cause of concern or expense should an overhaul or repairs be needed. Suspension, steering and brakes. Ford equipped its big saloon with double wishbone suspension up front and an independent setup at the back, and it resulted in ride and handling that received plenty of praise from Motoring Magazine road testers of the day. Well-maintained examples should still impress in both of these departments today, and if you're looking for a classic that'll cover big miles in comfort, you'll probably find the Granada very much to your liking. There's not much to worry about in terms of problems, either, so you can just concentrate on checking for the usual suspects of worn dampers, broken springs and corrosion around mounting points. Sourcing original specification bushes isn't always straightforward, but the easy answer is to replace them with polyurethane items. Doing the whole lot can see costs add up, especially once labor is factored in, but it'll be worth it in the long run. Another aspect that made these Granadas good to drive was the precise and accurate rack and pinion steering, so any waywardness or slop will need further investigation. Aside from the rack itself, where a rebuild will be needed, parts are available, so an overhaul shouldn't be problematic. Check for any leaks from the power assistance hydraulics, though. As for the brakes, they were well up to the task, but it's worth checking for the usual signs of wear and neglect. Consumables such as pads and shoes are easy enough to find, but sourcing a replacement master cylinder or servo isn't quite so straightforward, so you're looking at a specialist rebuild. Calipers can be rebuilt, too, and it's neither a difficult nor expensive job. Lastly, some cars are fitted with alloy wheels, so check for corrosion and damage and ensure that examples stored away for shows and very occasional use aren't sitting on aged tires. Interior and trim. These cars certainly aren't lacking when it comes to space and comfort, and those attributes alone are enough to make the Granada a very attractive ownership proposition. Where difficulties crop up is sourcing replacement trim, so don't be surprised to find the example you're considering isn't original in this respect. In any case, you'll certainly need to spend time assessing the condition of seats, carpets and plastic moldings. While finding a rust-free car is far more important, don't underestimate the expense of professional refurbishment, or the hassle involved in tracking down missing bits. That's pretty much the extent of the bad news, though. Equipment levels are simple by modern standards, so it's just a matter of checking that the likes of switchgear, windows, locks and sunroof mechanisms all work as they should, and the straightforward electrics don't present much of a problem, either. Scruffy wiring and corroded connections are likely to be at the root of most problems, although it is worth reassuring yourself that the car you're considering hasn't been subjected to amateur repairs and modifications. There's the potential for all manner of bodges over the years, and plenty of time can be spent sorting them out. Ford Granada Mk1. My thoughts. If you're looking for a family-friendly classic that's good to drive, then you'll likely find the Granada a very appealing prospect. The Ford badge might not have the cachet of the premium German Marques, but when it comes to all-round ability, such things really don't matter. The comfort, space and refinement on offer make long journeys a pleasure, and if you opt for the smooth 3.0 V6 you won't feel short-changed by the performance, either. Combined with the automatic gearbox, it's a very relaxing way to travel. If there's a downside to ownership, it's the potential for corrosion and the rarity of some parts, and while it's no different to many rivals in that respect, it does mean you'll want to be circumspect before considering a restoration project. You'll be better off finding an example where all the hard work has already been done, in which case you can just concentrate on keeping it in tip-top condition. And that shouldn't be too difficult given the helpful and knowledgeable owners clubs that are out there. Yes, the Mk2 was much improved, but the original Granada very much deserves consideration. While these cars aren't exactly common in the classifieds, you will find a small number for sale at any one time, and the clubs are a good starting point if you're keen on bagging this big Ford. We're looking at prices for the 3.0-litre V6 saloon here, and even a complete basket case could command £2,000 to £3,000 with a less dilapidated restoration £1,000 or two more. For something rather nicer you'll need to budget in the region of £7,000 £9,000, while anything considered to be in the excellent category is comfortably heading for the mid-teens. The absolute best can fetch anything from £20,000 upwards. That values have been rising in recent years reflects the enthusiasm out there for classic Fords, and as the numbers of restoration cases dwindle with only good ones being left, you can expect them to continue climbing. As for the remainder of the range, smaller engined models can be a little cheaper than the figures quoted here. Estates are similar to saloons, and coupes are worth a little more. Best compact van. Ford Transit Courier. Despite being one of the smallest vans available, the Ford Transit Courier provides enough space, comfort and value to suit a large variety of business drivers. Priced from £17,080 excluding VAT. Fuel economy 42.157.6 mpg. CO2 emissions 129 to 156 grams per kilometer. Load space 2.3 meters 3. Payload 566 to 595 kilograms. Power 75 to 99 bhp. Torque 125 to 159 pound-feet. Ford Transit Courier. Interior. Sharing most of its underpinnings and engine range with the Ford Fiesta small car, the Transit Courier is engaging to drive, with agile handling, a comfortable ride and lots of equipment if you go for our recommended trend trim level. But it's also a van that's capable of carrying a deceptively large load. In fact, its boxy rear end offers more than twice the load volume of even the largest car-derived vans, and with a maximum payload approaching 600 kilograms, the Transit Courier is close to competing with larger vans from the segment above, such as the Renault Kangoo and Vauxhall Combo Cargo. While it can't offer the breadth of choice in body types that its larger siblings, the Transit Custom and Transit Connect, are able to, the little Transit Courier van makes up for it with a choice of gutsy diesel engines. There's a 99 bhp 1.0-litre petrol, too, and it's a peach, yet it should also be relatively cheap to run. The Transit Courier may be little, but there's no doubting that it is a proper commercial vehicle, with such practical features as twin wide aperture sliding doors and a folding mesh bulkhead with a collapsible passenger seat. Ford E-Transit. Priced from £44,945 excluding VAT. Range, 196 miles. CO2 emissions, 0 grams per kilometer 5.1 cubed. Payload 1758 kilogram. Power 181 to 265 bhp. Torque, 317 pounds. Featuring in the past, large electric vans like the Ford E-Transit were a very rare sight on UK roads. While small and medium-sized electric vans have made growing sense for businesses for some time, large vans, which need to balance load lugging capacity and electric range very delicately, have largely remained the domain of diesel. Until now, that is, because the best of them now has an electric motor. With an official range of 196 miles in chassis cab form and the choice of 25 different combinations of motor, height, and length, the E-Transit represents the first of a new generation of electric vans. That is, vans, which make sense both as working vehicles and as green transport solutions. It offers the carrying capacity a van driver could want. In fact, with load volumes of up to 15.1 cubed and a payload capacity of up to 1758 kg, the E-Transit can carry more than its electric van rivals. Indeed, the E-Transit goes further than any other electric van in making life easy for its occupants. The Pro Power onboard function, for example, lets drivers run anything from power tools to lights directly from the van's power supply, rather than needing to carry an extra generator. Meanwhile, the growing sales support service from Ford Pro helps buyers do everything from tracking their fleet to installing the necessary charging infrastructure to keep it moving. And then there's the way the E-Transit drives. It's more agile and involving than the Maxus E-Deliver 9, Mercedes E-Sprinter, or Volkswagen E-Crafter, while also being comfortable and well equipped as standard. There's a lot more to come from Ford's electric van range, not least the smaller E-Transit Custom coming in 2023. But if this E-Transit is anything to go by, the future is indeed rosy for van drivers looking to go green.